before there was a king in Israel, before David sang his psalms or wore a crown, there was a man named Boaz. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a prophet. He was a farmer. But God was writing a royal story, and it began in a barley field. This is the story of Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, the man of mercy, and the bridge between Ruth and a king. In a time of famine, in a land filled with grief, a foreign widow wandered into Bethlehem, and God was watching, because from their obedience came a lineage that would shape the destiny of Israel and lead to a king greater than David, the Messiah. This is not just a love story. It's a redemption story, a royal promise planted in humble soil. Welcome to the story of Boaz, the promise that shaped the king's lineage. In the days when the judges ruled, Israel was a fractured land, a nation with no king, where everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The land groaned under the weight of rebellion. Waves of disobedience led to divine discipline. And in the land of Judah, famine fell like a shadow. In the small town of Bethlehem, ironically meaning house of bread, there was no bread left, and so a man named Elimelech made a desperate decision. He gathered his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and left the promised land. They crossed the Jordan and journeyed to Moab, a land of foreign gods and ancient enemies. It was not an easy choice, but hunger has a way of pushing people into places they never thought they'd go. Naomi looked back at the hills of Judah, the land of covenant, and wondered if God had turned his face. They settled in Moab, and for a time there was relief. There was food. There was shelter. But what began as a temporary escape became a permanent stay. Then the unexpected struck. Elimelech died. Naomi was now a widow in a foreign land. But she still had her sons, and they married Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth. Chilion married Orpah. 10 years passed, but those years did not bring the children Naomi had hoped for. Only more loss. First one son died, then the other. Now Naomi stood in a foreign field, a woman emptied of everything she had once held dear. No husband, no sons, no grandchildren, just 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, and a shattered heart. She had left Bethlehem full, but now she was barren. Yet what Naomi could not see was that God was already weaving redemption from her ruin, because in her grief, a seed of legacy had already been planted. A woman named Ruth, a Moabite outsider, would choose loyalty over ease, would cling to Naomi, would follow her into a future she could not see. And one day, a man named Boaz would walk into that story, a man of honor, a man of promise. But for now, this was the chapter of famine, of funerals, of fragile hope, and the road back to Bethlehem was about to begin. Naomi heard a whisper, a rumor carried on the wind from the hills of Judah, that the famine had ended, and that the Lord had visited his people with bread. She looked to the horizon. She had buried her husband. She had buried her sons. There was nothing left in Moab for her, except graves. But in Bethlehem, perhaps there was hope. So Naomi rose, an older woman now, worn by sorrow, crushed by time. She packed what little she had, and began the long road home. Beside her walked 2 shadows, Ruth and Orpah, her Moabite daughters-in-law. They had lost husbands too, and though they were young, they had remained beside Naomi, until Naomi stopped, and turned. "Go back, my daughters," she pleaded. "Return to your mother's homes. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with me." They wept. They clung to her. But she insisted, "Even if I had more sons, would you wait for them to grow?" Orpah kissed her goodbye, with tears and affection, and turned back. But Ruth did not move. Instead, she stepped forward, tears burning in her eyes, and said words that would echo through eternity. Do not urge me to leave you or turn back. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me, if anything but death separates you and me." Naomi looked into Ruth's eyes, and saw steel, and loyalty, and love. So the two walked on together, across plains, through valleys, over hills scorched by the sun, until finally they arrived. Bethlehem. It had been more than 10 years. But as Naomi entered the town, the women stirred. "Is this Naomi?" they whispered. She looked older, more tired, her back a little more bent, her smile faint. "Do not call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." But standing beside her was Ruth, a Moabite, a widow, a woman who had walked into a foreign land, not for riches, but for love. And it was the beginning of the barley harvest. The fields of Boaz were ripe, and the God of Israel, who writes redemption from ruin, was already moving. The sun rose over Bethlehem, casting golden light over fields brushed with barley. It was harvest season, the time of abundance, when the poor and the stranger could glean behind the harvesters, in accordance with the law of Moses. But for Naomi and Ruth, survival was not just a tradition. It was a desperate need. There was no husband, no father, no brothers, just two widows, dependent on the kindness of strangers. So Ruth spoke. "Let me go to the fields," she said, "and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose eyes I may find favor." Naomi nodded. Perhaps the fields would offer more than grain. Perhaps God would offer mercy. And so Ruth went out. She walked alone through the barley-lined hills, not knowing where her feet would take her. But Scripture tells us she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Coincidence? No. Providence. Boaz, a man of standing, a man of honor, a man of legacy, had returned from the town. He stood tall in the field, watching as his workers moved with practiced rhythm, and he greeted them. "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." But Boaz's eyes were drawn to a figure among the stalks, a young woman, not one of the usual poor. "Whose young woman is this?" he asked the foreman. And the reply came, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi. She asked to glean behind the harvesters. She's been here since morning, working steadily." Boaz nodded, but inside, something stirred. A foreigner, a widow, and yet so much dignity. He walked toward her. Ruth noticed the man approach. She straightened, uncertain of his intent. But then he spoke gently. "Listen, my daughter. Do not go to another field. Stay here with my servant girls. I have ordered the men not to touch you. And when you are thirsty, drink from what the men have drawn." Her eyes widened. This was more than kindness. It was protection. She bowed to the ground. "Why have I found favor in your eyes?" she asked. "That you should take notice of me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all that you have done for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband, how you left your father, mother, and homeland, and came to a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Those words, "under whose wings," Ruth would not forget them. Boaz didn't just offer protection. He offered blessing. And though he did not yet know, God was writing a story far greater than either of them could see. In the dusty rows of grain, redemption was beginning to bloom. The midday sun beat down upon the fields of Bethlehem. Workers paused to rest beneath the shade of olive trees. And Ruth, the Moabite widow, was invited to sit among them. It was Boaz who called her. "Come here," he said, "and eat some bread. Dip your morsel in the vinegar." A simple gesture. But from a man of Israel to a foreign woman, it was an act of dignity, of inclusion. Ruth sat among the reapers. She ate until she was satisfied, and even had some left over. Then she rose to glean again. But Boaz had already made other plans. He called his young men aside. "Let her glean even among the sheaves," he instructed. "Do not reproach her, and pull out some stalks from the bundles for her. Leave them on purpose, and do not rebuke her. In other words, don't just allow her to gather. Make sure she finds what she needs." So Ruth gleaned until evening. Her hands moved swiftly, collecting the golden treasure from the soil. By the end of the day, she had nearly an ephah of barley, an overwhelming amount for a single woman. She returned to Naomi, dusty, tired, but eyes shining. Naomi was stunned. "Where did you glean today?" she asked. "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." And Ruth replied, "The name of the man is Boaz." Naomi's eyes widened. A long-forgotten spark returned to her voice. "May the Lord bless him, for his kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. That man is a close relative of ours, one of our kinsman redeemers." Hope, that long-dead flower, suddenly bloomed in Naomi's heart. A redeemer, a rescuer, a man still tied to their family line. Could God be writing something more? So Ruth continued gleaning, day after day, under Boaz's protection. He provided food. He offered safety. He gave more than law required. He gave favor. And in those fields, the Lord was tilling soil far deeper than barley. He was tilling the soil of destiny. The harvest was coming, in more ways than one. The harvest was ending. The barley had been gathered. The fields were quiet. And now came the season of threshing. But Naomi was restless. She had seen the way Boaz looked at Ruth. She had watched how he treated her, not as a stranger, but as someone cherished. She could no longer ignore it. Something divine was unfolding. So one evening, as the sun set behind the stone houses of Bethlehem, Naomi turned to Ruth and said, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" She explained her plan. A bold plan. Boaz would be at the threshing floor, winnowing the grain under moonlight, a place where men labored, and then slept beside their heaps of barley. It was no place for a woman. And yet, wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor, Naomi instructed. But do not make yourself known to the man, until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lay down to sleep, Ruth was to uncover his feet and lie down. It was not seduction. It was covenant language, a humble request for redemption. Ruth could have said no. She could have chosen a safer path. But instead she whispered, "All that you say to me, I will do." That night, Ruth washed. She dressed in clean linen. She made her way down the hillside path, quiet as a shadow. Boaz was there, by the heaps of grain. He ate. He drank. He rejoiced in the bounty the Lord had provided. Then, under the stars, he lay down to sleep beside the grain pile. Ruth approached silently. She uncovered his feet and lay down. Midnight. Boaz stirred, confused by the chill. He turned and saw a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked, startled. And Ruth answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer." Silence. Then Boaz smiled. "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter," he said, "for you have shown more kindness now than at the beginning, in that you did not go after younger men, whether poor or rich. Do not be afraid. I will do all that you ask." But Boaz added, "There is one nearer than I in line to redeem. If he will redeem you, good. But if he will not, I will. A risk had been taken, a bold step made in the dark. But under the stars of Bethlehem, a love rooted in honor and holiness had begun to grow. And the God who watches over widows and sojourners was not silent. Morning broke over Bethlehem, and with it came a stirring sense of purpose. Boaz rose from the threshing floor, wrapped in determination. He had made a promise, not just to Ruth, but to the God of Israel. And now it was time to act. He made his way to the city gate, where legal matters were settled, and where elders gathered as witnesses. He sat, and as if drawn by unseen hands, the closer Redeemer, the man who had the legal right to claim Elimelech's land, walked by. Boaz called to him, "Turn aside, friend. Sit down here." The man came. Boaz then gathered 10 elders, respected men of the town, and invited them to sit as witnesses. It was time for truth to be spoken in the open. "Naomi, who has come back from Moab," Boaz said, "is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought to inform you, buy it in the presence of these elders. If you will redeem it, do so. But if not, tell me, for I am next after you." The man nodded. "I will redeem it," he said. Ruth, watching from a distance, may have felt her heart sink. Had she misunderstood? Would this other man take her into his household? Would she fade into someone else's story? But Boaz was not finished. "On the day you buy the land from Naomi," Boaz continued, "you must also take Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance." At this, the man hesitated. His confident eyes faltered. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I cannot redeem it for myself," he said, "lest I endanger my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot do it." The silence that followed was filled with destiny. A sandal was removed, a symbol of legal transfer in ancient Israel, and handed to Boaz. The elders leaned in, and Boaz stood tall. "You are witnesses this day," he declared, "that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's, from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance." A Moabite woman, a foreigner, now embraced into the covenant story of Israel. The elders and the people at the gate answered with blessing. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home, like Rachel and Leah, who built up the house of Israel. May your house be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you." It was done, not by chance, not by power, but by covenant love. And what began in a famine, through sorrow and loss, was now blooming into a future filled with promise. The streets of Bethlehem buzzed with quiet awe. News traveled quickly. Boaz had taken Ruth as his wife. What had begun in famine was now ending in fullness. What had begun in loss was now crowned with love. Ruth the Moabite, once a stranger, once a widow, now stood honored and radiant, welcomed into Israel not by law alone, but by the heart of a Redeemer. And the Lord was not silent. Scripture tells us, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son." The child's cry echoed through the stone walls of their home, a sound of hope restored. Naomi, the woman who had once said, "Call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me," now held a baby in her arms, a grandson, a legacy. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "The Lord has not left me without a Redeemer," she whispered, "and this child shall be famous in Israel." The women of the town gathered around Naomi. They sang praises. They rejoiced with her. "He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher in your old age." Ruth, the woman they had once seen as a foreigner, was now called, "Better to you than 7 sons." Naomi rocked the child in her arms. She smiled. And they gave him a name. Obed. A simple name. But from him would come great kings. Obed became the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. And from David's line would one day come a Messiah, a Redeemer. Not just for Ruth. Not just for Naomi. Not just for Israel. But for all the nations. From famine to fullness. From sorrow to joy. From a field of barley to the King of Kings. This is the promise that shaped the lineage of a king. And it began with a man named Boaz, a woman named Ruth, and a God who never forgets his own.